Welcome to A Guide to Every Deck in EDH. Today we're looking at two different commanders. The first is Grand Warlord Radha, and the second is Tesak Judith's Hellhound. Now these commanders are pretty similar, so it's mainly a difference of whether you want easy mode with Grand Warlord Radha or hard mode with Tesak. So let's start with Grand Warlord Radha. This is a 4 mana, 3/4 with haste, and it says whenever one or more creatures you control attack, you add that much mana in any combination of red and green. Until end of turn, you don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. So clearly, we want to go wide and have a lot of creatures attacking so that we can generate a ton of mana, and then we want some big payoffs for that mana. So we've got a bunch of beatdown. We're going to be having a lot of creatures anyway, so we can play cards like Beastmaster Ascension, Crater Hoof, Pack Attack, Mercadia's Downfall, and Martin Stromgald, as well as cards that generate tokens, so Loyal Apprentice, Krenko, Tin Street Kingpin, and Hanwar Garrison. We've got some card draw. Obviously, we're hitting our opponent, so Toski's going to be pretty good, and Skull Clamp since we're making tokens. Then we have here our main combo pieces, so Aggravated Assault and Hellkite Charger. So as long as we have, in the case of Aggravated Assault, at least 5 creatures that can attack and not get blocked every combat, we will generate 5 mana, which we can then spend on Aggravated Assault to untap all of our creatures and attack again, and therefore take infinite combats. In the case of Hellkite Charger, we need 7 because its ability costs 7. But either way, either one of these with a sufficient number of creatures that are not blocked can allow us to go infinite in combat. Then because we need to be able to go to combat, we do have some ways of protecting our creatures from getting killed. So Bedlam gives evasion. Nothing can block. Therefore, we can always attack our opponents without any of our creatures dying in combat. We also have some additional extra combat cards. So Great Train Heist and Savage Beating. Mainly these ones because we can cast them during combat when we make the mana, and in the case of Savage Beating, we can potentially get double strike on all of our guys, and in the case of Great Train Heist, we can pump and give first strike to our dudes or make treasure tokens. Then we've got some pretty straightforward lands here in the Gruul mana base, with Soken's being another way of generating tokens that can attack. We've got our protection. We don't want Grand Lord Radha to get killed or countered. And it's also important to note things like Rhythm of the Wild to give haste. Also, Dolmen Gate prevents all damage that is dealt to our attackers, so this works similarly to how Bedlam works in that we can attack without any of our creatures dying in combat. Anything with flying like Xantid Swarm is also at a benefit because then this doesn't get blocked either. Then we've got all of our ramp with particular attention paid to having more creatures, although we're in green, so we would already play a bunch of Mono Dorks anyway, but we're going to play even more than normal if possible, since all of these can attack and generate mana in combat as well. Similarly, Professional Facebreaker pretty good in this regard. We also have Trail Tracker Scout, which is whenever you expend 8, meaning you have spent your 8th total mana, you get to return a permanent from your graveyard to your hand. We're obviously generating a lot of mana, so this is just a Mono Dork that can have an additional recursive ability on it. We have Artifact Mutation, which blows up an artifact, and then we get X11s, where that is the artifact's mana value. So removal that gives us token creatures, along with all the rest of these cards. Then we just got cards that generate additional tokens. So things like Goblin Instigator, Mog War Marshal, Sear Slicer Goblin, Dragon Fodder, Krenko's Command, etc. Just, we want to flood the board with tokens. This is a cheap enough way of doing it. All of these cards can eventually translate into getting a bunch of mana. So all of these are here. So yeah, this is mainly what we're doing. So we're either just beating down our opponents with some big pumps like Beastmaster Ascension and whatnot, or we're generating a ton of mana and then trying to go infinite in combat with Aggravated Assault or Hellkite Charger. Now moving on to Tesak, this is hard mode for a number of reasons. So this is also a 4 mana commander that also has 3 power. It is Unleash, meaning you may have it enter with a +1 counter, and if you do, it can't block. Other dogs you control have Unleash as well, although we're not doing dog tribal related stuff. Creatures you control with counters on them have haste, and whenever Tesak attacks, add red for each attacking creature. So obviously we're in mono red now, so we have less access to cards, especially Mono Dorks. And more importantly, the mana that we generate is only in the attack step. It does not persist through combat, meaning if we want to spend it, we have to spend it in combat. So immediately that means, for example, that Aggravated Assault is not usable because Aggravated Assault can only be activated as a sorcery. So that is not a game plan that we can do. And just anything else that we were going to cast post-combat with all this extra mana, none of that is possible. So anything that we're going to use this mana on has to either be an instant or has to have an activated ability that we can spend it on. So with that said, we're doing more beatdown than usual. We've got cards like Berserker's Onslaught and Eldrazi Monument. Since we don't have access to Crater Hoof and Beastmaster Ascension, more cards that add tokens, so things like Kari Zev, but we still have many of the same cards around, like Martin Stromgald, Downfall, Pack Attack, etc. Goro Goro becomes a way that we can spend this mana in combat, so we can spend the 5 to create a Dragon Spirit token. Ancient Stone Idol costs less for each attacker, and it has Flash, so this is another thing to spend all of our mana on. Also Porphyros for our creatures entering, but we can also just spend the mana on activating Porphyros to pump our team. Then we've got things like Commune with Lava, since we can use this at instant speed to spend all the mana on this to impulse draw all these cards. We do still combo with Hellkite Charger, since this is not restricted in the same way that Aggravated Assault is. Still have Bedlam, still have the instant speed combat tricks. Our land base is obviously much more straightforward, seeing as we're mono red. We still have stuff like Dolmen Gate Bedlam in order to attack through, still have some protection spells, although obviously not as many. We do want, again, our ramp spells to be creatures so we can attack with them, but our options are worse, seeing that we're in mono red, but we do still have some. Professional Facebreaker still here. We have our removal, which includes some creatures, because again, if we can get our removal to be creatures, that's helpful, since we want our creatures to be able to attack and trigger Tesak for more mana. Then we're in mono red, so we do have access to stacks like Blood Moon and Winter Moon and whatnot. Also, Decree of Annihilation can be cycled at instant speed to blow up all the lands, so this is another method of spending our mana during combat. And then various untagged creatures in the same way that we had before, so making lots of tokens, but with a particular shout out to Dragonkin Berserker, in which we can pay 5 to create a dragon in the same way that we do with Goro Goro. But whichever commander you decide to go with, that is basically the breakdown for Grand Warlord Radha and Tesak in EDH.